people, because they know my background, they're so shocked. They're like, you knew all about Islam, you knew all those things, and yet in the end, you became a Christian. How so? Because they think that if someone really knows about Islam, that they would never want to leave Islam. They would always want to be Muslims. And when I learned about the life of Jesus and his gospel, that to me was like irresistible, maybe is the word that I want to use here.
Love God, love people, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Welcome back to the AC Podcast. My name is Andy Steiger. I'm joined today with
Wes Huff.
And Wesley. Where are we?
So we've been in Turkey for the last little bit, and we're shooting on location at the St. John's Basilica. So the ruins of the St. John's Basilica, but this is a historic church where in the 5th century, in 431, the Third Ecumenical Council, so the Council of Ephesus, which was dealing with the Nestorian controversy, which is not the topic of this podcast, but if you're listening to this and you want to learn about the intricacies of the ecumenical councils, you can look up what Nestorianism is and why the church was combating it, but it was a convening in this location. So this is an ancient church, goes back to the 4th century, late 4th century. But
it's right outside ancient Ephesus. So we were just only a couple kilometers from here.
Yeah.
We were exploring Ephesus today.
And this is the tradition says that John brought Mary here to Ephesus. So that's why it's called the Basilica of St. John, is because...
So they would say that he was, on the island of Patmos, but then they'd say that he came here. And in fact, there's a house called the House of Mary, not far from here, you would say, that Mary lived.
And we are joined with, some of you might be wondering, who's that guy in between?
Yeah, who's
Andy
our special
and
guest?
Wes? Yeah, they're just going to keep talking. They're not even going to recognize him. This is our Turkish guide, Nurullah. So thanks for being with us, Nurullah.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I already said it. It's a privilege and an honor, really, to be a part of what you're doing. And I've been following you for years, Wes, and I've been translating some of your works. They have been very helpful and really incredible resources for the Turkish church to have as well. And now I met you in person, and Andy as well, and I take part in this awesome project, Can I Trust the Bible series?
Yeah.
And I'm able to show you around. That's so cool, and I'm so happy.
Yeah, so why don't we preface by saying the reason we're in Turkey is because we're shooting the next few episodes of the Can I Trust the Bible series, which you can find at the Apologetics Canada website. The first 2 episodes, we're recording episodes 3 and 4. But we thought we'd sit down with our guide, Nurullah, to tell us a little bit about his backstory as a Christian here in Turkey.
Now, just to preface, the sun is right on us, so that's why Wes and I are wearing sunglasses. But Nurullah said, no, he doesn't need any sunglasses.
He's a local, he's used to the sunshine.
Yeah, and I can't be as cool as you guys are, so...
Yeah, us Canadians, man. It's like, what is this bright thing in the sky?
Yeah, it's a Canadian sandwich.
And actually, that's maybe like a great gateway, because my name is Nurullah, and its meaning is the light of God, the light of Allah. So, and their delight is like divine light in Arabic. And sometimes that, like, for people is really strange when they hear that I'm a Christian and they're like, wait, like your name is Nurullah, it has like the word Allah in it as well. So how can you be a Christian? Like, is it even possible for Christians to use the word Allah and stuff like that? So I myself also produce apologetics content online. So there I respond to these kind of like questions and claims that like maybe like Christians cannot use the word Allah and stuff. But and at first even I myself questioned this, right? But then later on I discovered it is the word for God that was used by Arab Christians even before Islam. So there is no problem for Christians using the word, and there's no problem in me having that name. And actually now in Turkey, for me, that's a great opportunity to share the gospel with people. Because even online, with the stuff that I do, when people hear like Nurullah and Christian, they're immediately like drawn to like asking questions like, okay, I want to hear more about you, and I want to hear more about your story. Like, how come you're Nurullah and you're Christian? So,
well, let's talk about the work that you do online. You do apologetics ministry here in Turkey, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've been doing it for 5 years now by myself, but before that, there was like a ministry that was doing online works similar to what you're doing with Apologetics Canada. Unfortunately, that ministry had to end for some reasons, and then I continued by myself, and I started during the pandemic. And so what I've been doing is, because I speak English and I understand, and most of my studies, like in apologetics and theology, I do them in English, and there are so many resources in English, but there are so few in Turkish. So what I'm trying to do is like to create resources, especially for the Turkish church in general, in Turkish, for the Turkish church to benefit and to use. And so I've been creating videos, I've been sharing posts on social media. On, for example, Instagram, I've taken and translated Wes's infographics, and I've published them in Turkish as well. And a lot of people are actually like really using them. For example, like one was about the Council of Nicaea, right, which we even visited in our journey. And so that one really answers the claims about like the Council of Nicaea, that like, oh, was the canon decided there? What really happened at the Council of Nicaea? So stuff like that really is helpful, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to make Turkish resources available to the Turkish church, and not only like to believers, but also to non-believers, because they really don't know much about Christianity and like what Christians believe, what Christians do, and especially like Turkish Christians. Though like you, for example, have already experienced that there are many biblical sites in Turkey, and like Christianity was actually born in Turkey, like in Antioch, but
The word Christianity.
the word Christianity,
yeah.
and
Yeah, in the book of Acts, if you read, the first time believers are referred to as Christians is in Antioch, which is a Turkish city.
Yeah. And so sometimes like in Turkey, we have this idea of like, oh, Christianity is like Western. And so it came from the Western world. But no, like we have so many like places and stories that happened here in these lands. And so even like to share that with people sometimes is very enlightening. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing with my work. So targeting, especially the youth. So my target audience, like from the age of 18 to 25 to 30 maybe, but yeah, people are really taking my content in a positive way. They've been loving it, and they've been following me.
That's great. We should also just say we were currently we're in Ephesus. We were in Nicaea, which is the modern city of Iznik, and it wasn't that long ago, in 2014, that the waters of the lake Iznik had receded, and all of a sudden there were these ruins that were popping up and is being discussed as the potential site of Nicaea. So if you're wondering why we're here, well, that's a part of it, because that's an important part of the story of how we got the Bible, or at least even addressing some of the myths of how we got the Bible.
Yeah, combating some of those myths that exist about how we got the Bible. That took place at the Council of Nicaea in 325, and
Yeah,
true?
Which isn't true, right? These are myths. So at any rate, that's going to be some great content that people will get to see soon, but it gives a little bit of context as to why we're here. Now, love the fact that you're able to use, resources and be able, resources that Wes has produced and be able to share that here. It's interesting how we've seen that various places around the world that our resources have been and are being used, which is really exciting for us. And we're excited about the work that you're doing. But I think a lot of people would be asking and wondering, what does the church in Turkey look like? Like, are there very many Christians? What sorts of challenges and persecution do Christians experience here?
Yeah. Though, as we said, like there are many like biblical sites and like ancient sites like Nicaea, Antioch, and Ephesus. Turkey has like the majority of the population are Muslims. So even the believers in the Turkish church are usually converts from Islam. So they're Muslim background believers. And so, and in some cities we have like more local Turkish Christians, and in some cities we do not even have a church yet. And so that is something that the Turkish church is constantly praying for. And I'm originally from Gaziantep. It's a city in the southeast part of Turkey. For example, there used to be a church, and that's where I was also baptized. But nowadays there's not a church there anymore, and because the pastor had to leave, and so the church could not continue.
Well, I think a lot of people back home hear about this, where we don't even use the word missionary here, we've been using the word
Yeah.
right? Because that's the sort of challenge that exists here, and for some of them, they get their status here revoked, where the country, the government says you need to go home.
Yeah, and because like there are not as many local like believers, Turkish believers, as like maybe you have in Canada, right? So we also have a lot of like brothers and sisters coming from abroad, from other countries, to actually like serve us, to help us like maybe establish a church and to be with us and to be helpful in that way. But unfortunately in Turkey there is some kind of like pushback on that. So especially if you're not a citizen. If you're a citizen, we have a constitution, we have laws that say you're free to...
Well, you guys are a democracy.
Yeah, exactly. It's Republic of Turkey. So yeah, and in our constitution it says we are free to believe whatever we want, and we're even free to express it, to share it with others. But if you're not a Turkish citizen, unfortunately the pushback is that you get like this code, that there's like a special lettering for that as well, and numbering, and when you get that code you are to leave Turkey
Like fairly quickly?
Yeah, like within a week or so.
Oh,
within
wow.
10 days at most, I think. And then you're not allowed back. You cannot even like apply for visas or anything again. So you cannot enter Turkey. And there has been a lot of people, unfortunately, who got that kind of code and who was deported. And so that for the local church sometimes is challenging, but at other times we kind of even like glorify God even for those kind of like situations. Although it saddens us, it is sad that we lose our brothers and sisters, but in a way it helps the Turkish church to realize that yeah, like we are the local church here, and as the Turkish believers, we need to like stick together, and we need to like continue building these churches as locals, as citizens, and we need to reach out to more and more of the Turkish people in our country. So that kind of also motivates us, and that makes us realize that we can do it, like we need to do it.
Now, I know that you've been outspoken about your faith, and in a country, a Muslim country like Turkey, that can cause a lot of trouble for you. And I know you have received death threats and things like that. But I'm just kind of curious, what gives you the courage to really take a stand for Jesus, knowing, that the pushback can and is so extreme?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I receive a lot of like threats and stuff like that online, especially because I'm very active and present online. But what keeps me going is because I came to believe in Christ after a choice that I consciously made by myself, not because of I was pushed or forced or like I was told to believe in. Because when I was a Muslim, I was a Muslim because I was born in a Muslim country, born in a Muslim family, but I was like trying to practice it. I was trying to be a faithful Muslim, but I did not decide that for myself. So in my like faith journey, I realized at some point that if I'm gonna believe in something, I need to believe what I know to be true, not just what I've been told as true. So because I did that, and in my faith journey, that's how I came to Christ, I am so like convinced, and I'm so certain that what I believe is true. So, and I know that like this life is, I always say that like this life is temporary, and I have this eternal life to look forward to. So whatever can or is gonna happen in this life, because I know what I believe is true, does not matter. Because I know that I have eternal life in Jesus, whatever happens here, like Paul also says, right? That has been like a great encouragement for me when I read those verses.
Well, I guess it's fitting that we're here, right? We're, after the Apostle Paul, or near where the Apostle Paul had been imprisoned, and many others. I mean, Paul wrote his letter to the Ephesians from prison, and we have his prison epistles, right? So yeah, there is like that tradition, right, of persecution.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first time I actually watched a documentary on life of Paul, I was so touched because I saw kind of myself in him. I'm not trying to, of course, like elevate myself to his level, but in the sense that I actually, when I was a Muslim kid, I was so devout and I was so like radical in ways that I still have up to this day. I haven't deleted them. On Facebook, I have messages that I wrote to Christians abroad abroad. I was also trying to improve my English through chatting with foreigners online. So I have chats that I was telling them, you will go to hell. You have to believe in like Islam. You have to become a Muslim if you want to be saved. So I had like this kind of like...
We should talk about that. You weren't just a Muslim, you were a devout Muslim. I mean, you told us that you had memorized half of the Quran.
Yes.
And
I was on my way to actually memorizing the whole of the Quran, and my brother now, for example, has done that. And my dad was proud of me because I was on the way too. So for him, it was devastating. Like those are maybe like some other details we can talk another time. But yeah, so when I was a Muslim kid, yeah, because of my dad and how he raised us, I was raised in a household where we did not only practice it, but we were trying to understand what we believed in. And that pushed me, even as a Muslim kid, I wanted to like believe in the true religion, or the true way of being a Muslim, right? So that definitely pushed me like to also kind of talk to people about like Islam, try to convert them to Islam as well. Like I had that motivation at some point too. And so like I was even in some ways like I have cursed some of those people online, like those Christians eventually when they kept refusing to become a Muslim. So that was the way that I felt related to Paul as well, that I'm like, because he started persecuting Christians, and then after his encounter with Jesus, he became a believer. So yeah, for me, like these kind of like stories and parallels, they play a huge part in my testimony and in my faith journey.
Hi everybody, Andy Bannister here, evangelist, author and speaker, and I want to invite you to join me and also another Andy Steiger at the Apologetics Canada Summer School, June 6th to 8th at Sasquatch Mountain Resort in beautiful British Columbia. Now, here is the good news. Although you need to be called Andy to teach there, you do not need to be called Andy in order to come. What qualifies you to come to the summer school? Well, simply this. If you have a passion and a desire to learn and grow and get better at having conversations about your faith in Jesus with your friends, your neighbours, your colleagues, your classmates, your family members, you need to get along there. There'll be a wonderful opportunity to learn from like-minded people. There'll be great teaching sessions from me and the other guy called Andy. We'll also have lots of interaction and discussion, time for Q&A, bring any questions that you have, and we are going to be sharing really two things. Firstly, we're going to be helping you think about how to start conversations about your faith with friends who appear disinterested, but more importantly, or as importantly, also helping you stay in those conversations once they begin. I'll be sharing a lot from my book, How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot. Certainly when I was in the secular workplace, I spent a lot of my time looking like an idiot, and that's the book I wish the 25-year-old me had got my hands on. But there'll also be, as I say, lots of informal times learning from each other, lots of Q&A, and just an amazing opportunity to just learn together in that incredible location. So join me, Andy Bannister, along with Andy Steiger. Just click the link in the text accompanying this video, and you'll find all the information you need. We would love to see you there. You know you want to be there, so get yourself along and tell your friends as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially for the listeners, to hear that you were a very zealous Muslim adherer, and your family still very much is.
Yeah.
And so, in one sense, you have this outward ministry to a lot of other people, but you're also, in your choice to follow Christ, you're relating to the people you grew up with who would have seen this radical shift. This might be a question that, may be personal, but like how do you think they perceive that kind of 180 that you took? And are you able to express that in any open way to your brother, your father?
Yeah, so there are like interesting elements when we talk about that, because one is people, because they know my background, they're so shocked. They're like, you knew all about Islam, you knew all those things, and yet in the end, you became a Christian. How so? Because they think, and they don't know much about Christianity, but they somewhat know about their belief like Islam, and they're practicing it. They're also very kind of like religious. So they think that if someone really knows about Islam, that they would never want to leave Islam. They would always want to be Muslims. But so, and how I encountered that is when I read and when I learned about the life of Jesus and his gospel and who he is and what he taught and what he said about himself and what he said he came to do and that he did.
Yeah.
So those things are really, really big things that like when you study and when you understand that they're not only also stuff that like you are to just believe like with a blind faith, but like they're even backed up by like some historical evidence, for example, for about his crucifixion, right, and about his life as well. We have like strong evidence for all that. That to me was like irresistible. Maybe is the word that I want to use here. That's how I try to tell people that like, yeah, I see it as shocking to you, but that's exactly what I actually think you need to do as well.
Wow.
And because of that, actually, my brother did not even want to discuss religion with me for some time. Now he's a bit older. He's studying Islamic theology at university as well. But at first he was like, sometimes you say stuff because you know Islam and you know Christianity so well. You say stuff that I put my head in my pillow at night and I think about it and I get scared that I'm going to become Christian too. And
Heaven forbid.
for him, yeah, absolutely. He thinks that. And some of my friends said the same thing. And I'm like, if you believe that what you believe is the truth, you shouldn't be scared to hear from the other side, like from other sides and from me, from someone else who believes in another thing. Like you need to have that kind of confidence and that kind of like certainty. So if you are thinking that because of what I'm gonna say to you, you might lose your faith, I think maybe your faith in the first place is something that you need to think more about. So that's how I also kind of respond to that.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about faith. From a Muslim perspective, before becoming a Christian and just how Muslims in general would think, what do they think about Christians and Christianity in general?
Oh, that's a great question because in Turkey, as I said, like because people assume that it came from the West, they also look to the West for Christian lifestyle and especially like Hollywood movies. When I first became a Christian, some of my friends said, "Oh yeah, Islam was so difficult to practice, so you switch to Christianity, which is easier because you're allowed to have like free sex, free alcohol, everything is free, no sin. Like we see in these Hollywood movies." So like you wanted to become that. I'm like, have you read Jesus's words? And then I usually bring up like the verse about adultery that Jesus says like, it's not even like you do it, but even if you look at a woman and you think about doing it, it is a sin. And so like, it is not easy. Like in that regard, like it's not easy to be a Christian. It's not any easier than being a Muslim. And so people look up to those kind of like Hollywood movies and like the Western lifestyle that even now like we disagree with, right? Like when we see like how people are living, and most of those people are not even like they do not identify themselves as Christians either, but people have this idea. My dad, for example, that was the only thing that he had, and it was only until
what do you mean the only thing that he had?
like these
perception.
Hollywood
This
this perception.
Yeah.
It was only until after that he met actual Christians that he realized, oh, wait a minute, these Christians are actually not bad people. Because at first that was also the thing that scared him about me becoming a Christian, because he thought I was lost. I was gonna become something very bad, something that he wouldn't want for me. But so this is I think just this would fit right here, that I brought some an Amish family to my household. For my family to meet.
How did you bring an Amish family to your household in Turkey? Like that needs a little bit of backstory.
Yeah, so they were from Kentucky. They came to Gaziantep to serve the refugees there.
Oh.
And so I invited them for dinner. And for my family, because I'm able to speak English fluently, it is something that they can take pride in. They're like, wow, look at him, like he speaks 2 languages. So I'm like, I will bring some foreigners for dinner and I want you to introduce them to the Turkish culture, to Turkish food. My mom makes amazing food. So they were like, sure, bring them in. And they were this Amish family, so they had already 2 kids. The woman was pregnant. And they're like more traditional, and the woman even wears like a scarf. Okay. And so I heard that they don't believe in birth control and stuff like that. But so what happened is I brought them, and my dad started speaking with him, and I'm translating. And then after his conversation, like 30 minutes into his conversation with him, he turned to me and asked, "Are you sure these people are Christians?" because I agree with this guy about so much, like about like moral stuff, like about marriage, about like family. And he's like, so Christians are like, are not like what I knew about, like in those,
Or envisioned.
yeah, what he just maybe heard from others as well. And so these kind of like actual experiences, and it wasn't just the Amish family, but I actually brought a lot of Christians, especially foreigners, to my house for dinner. And the more he interacted with them, the more he came to realize, and his perception about Christians changed. And unfortunately, like in Turkey, some people lack that, and so they just assume what Christianity and who Christians about. So
Yeah, I often see that in different places that I've traveled, that they kind of just have this Hollywood perception of North America in general, but then they'll, believe that is Christianity in working its way in the culture sort of idea, and don't realize, well, no, that's the culture, but that doesn't mean that all people are like that, first of all, and that Christians are like that in general.
they do that even with like political stuff. Sometimes they assume like a country is Christian, and when that country does something wrong, like it gets into a war.
We do
and
the
kills
same
people.
thing. We do the same
That
thing.
happens. Yeah. I think there is a different like perception though. The West is Christian and the East is, whatever. It's Muslim, it's Hindu, it's Buddhist, and so for the fact that there are Muslim majority countries that do exist, I can see how the misunderstanding, if you thought that places like Canada and the United States and the United Kingdom were these Christian nations, they have this Christian foundings, right? Then you watch Hollywood or you watch, BBC shows, and there's lots of, like you said, drinking and premarital sex and thinking like, oh, those Christians, they're terrible people.
Yeah, and like maybe, I know this is your show, but I might ask you a question, because sometimes some Americans or like some people abroad, before they come to Turkey, they have this preconception about Turkey, maybe having camels and being a desert.
Sure,
and
yeah.
that, like not as developed as this. Like either if you had that kind of idea, or if it surprised you, like to see Turkey the way that it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't know what you don't know, right? And so there are blind spots in our understanding often in the West. So I don't think I necessarily thought that there would be camels. But you do have these kind of ideas where like you think of this area of the world as desert.
Or not as advanced or developed. I mean, this might surprise listeners, but the airport here is the 5th largest in the world.
Yeah.
And if you would have told me it was the largest in the world, I would have believed you. That airport is humongous.
There were scooters you could rent in the airport to get to different locations. Like, you know how there are like bikes and scooters you can rent in cities? We were just in Washington, D.C., and we rented a bunch of scooters to get where we need to go. The Istanbul airport is so large that you can rent scooters to go from one end to the other. Yeah.
And I had this idea that that the streets are going to be a little more chaotic than they were, although they can be.
And we did get a taste of that.
Yeah, I did, because Nurullah said, listen, I would prefer not to drive. So I got the duty of driving here. And maybe we could jump to some clips here of just how chaotic it got. Because I remember there's this one street, Nurullah's like, okay, turn on this street. And I'm like, I don't know that I want to turn onto this street. Like, it looked like I was, driving
down a sidewalk
full of people shopping.
Yeah.
And
we did. We turned down it and we drove straight through it, and everybody just kind of moved out of the way.
Yeah. They didn't care. They didn't care at all. But it can be challenging to drive here. There's no doubt about it.
I myself couldn't do it, but in Turkey, the mindset is even a truck could enter that street, like that tight street. So I'm glad that I actually told you to do it. I know like it's my country and I could have driven because I know maybe the road's better, but you have been a fantastic driver. I'm so glad that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
I do think it's an interesting point to highlight though, Nurullah, as you said, like misconceptions exist on both sides.
They do.
It's not just Muslims thinking everybody in the West is Christian and what they're seeing on TV is Christianity. Maybe there are listeners who have just no concept of the technological advancement or the kind of modernness of a lot of Turkish cities. So I think it's a good point to highlight that we all have these kind of sociological blind spots that exist about different cultures.
I mean, that's one of the things that I always love about coming to a place like this, that you get a sense, of what's really happening, what's going on, and particularly love getting to meet people who live in these countries and getting to hear their stories and getting a better understanding of what's actually happening around the world. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk with you and get into these issues, just so that people can appreciate, the challenges that do exist to be a Christian. In different places in the world is challenging right now. What would you say, though, is one of the biggest challenges that you face in the ministry you're doing here?
Yeah, it is. So for me and for, I think, the Turkish Christians, it always feels like it is also a different culture when you become a Christian. So it's almost a bit like people think that we abandon our like whole culture and identity of like being a Turk. And so that is a misconception. And people even like tell me sometimes, or like comment on my videos, they're like, a Turk cannot be a Christian. And I'm like, wait a minute, like being a Turk has not anything to do with like being a Christian, because one is about your ethnicity and the other is your faith, so, but of course, obviously, like when you are a Christian, you assume some different like cultures, and that culture, I don't mean like the Western culture, but the Christian culture that we can trace back to Jesus and what he taught and how he wanted us to live, right? For example, loving your enemies is something that we do not have in our culture. And
in Turkish culture?
In Turkish culture, and also in like as a Muslim kid, that would like be something that I could not accept at all if you told me like to love my enemies. That's not the mindset that I had. That's not the culture that that was familiar to me, right? So these kind of like different cultural elements that you assume as a Christian, sometimes feels difficult to practice, like to practice those and to act them out, because even people will look to you and they will think you're a different person now. You're outcasted in a way that like you're not one of them, you're something else. And because you were not born in a Christian country, let's say, or like in a country where maybe those values are more obvious or like are more mixed with the local culture, then you're kind of somewhere in between. And sometimes it is easy for the Turkish Christians to feel like maybe they don't belong to anywhere. But I think especially to have like local churches and to establish a Turkish Christian kind of culture, I think is important, because one of my mentors always say the gospel is not to a specific culture, is not like to convert or change cultures,
Right.
but it just adapts itself into the culture, the existing culture.
Yeah, it's transcultural. In the book of Acts, when we have the Council of Jerusalem, the question is, do converts to Christianity, like Gentiles who are believing in Jesus as the Messiah, do they need to get, say, circumcised? And in that sense, the decision of that council was, you don't need to become Jewish in order to become Christian. And that movement from then on, it didn't reduce Christianity to any one specific ethnicity or culture or sort of ethnographic perspective. But you do have that in Islam. And ironically, Turkish culture was not Islamic prior to the 7th century, right? A lot of it was Christian. And then there was a shift. So you're just going back to your roots, right?
Yeah.
With churches like the one that we're standing in the ruins of that predate Islam by centuries.
Yeah, we actually try to share that a lot with also people who think that like being a Christian and being a Turk are like contradictory. And like as how we also like the things that we said at the start of this conversation, that like this place, Turkey, this land has so many like biblical sites, references, and events that actually happened here. So
for the listener, if you're interested, every time the New Testament refers to Asia Minor or Asia, it's referring to Turkey. So if you were to like highlight every time that happened in, say, the book of Acts or the epistles, it would come up quite a bit.
Well, and in fact, to put in perspective, Ephesus was second to Rome. Like this city was large, and that might be overstating. I mean, Constantinople would have been huge as well. But we're talking, but I mean,
But
that's
in the
still
ancient
Turkey.
world,
also-
right?
yeah.
So Constantinople becomes a major city after, the Byzantine kind of rise in the 4th century. But prior to that, I think there were some pretty large state capitals. But like we heard today when we were at the ancient ruins of Ephesus, in like the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD, Ephesus would have been second to Rome.
We're here road tripping in Turkey, listening to Troy, aka Scribe Music's music, and his new single just dropped, Low Seat. It's awesome. Go check it out.
Patient in the low seat. I know there's a table with my name, so I ain't never gotta change or they notice me. I'ma keep my head low when I aim high. Patient in the low seat. Been so many doors that I've been knocking on.
One other question for you. I'm wondering, when you became a Christian, what was one of the biggest challenges to from going from practicing Islam to, practicing Christianity? What was one of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so for me, it was obviously with my family, especially my dad, because for him, like now, I think as I'm older and as I can relate to his experience more, although like the stuff that happened between us was very sad and he did a lot of things wrong. Even I, like, despite the fact that I became a Christian, until I actually spiritually matured, I also kept making mistakes. Even like kind of, because I was so convinced that I found the truth for myself, I sometimes like kind of, I use this term, like slap them in the face with that fact that their boy is gone now. Their boy has gone to a different path. Right. And so we had a lot of issues. My dad initially kicked me out of the house. So that was very difficult. And we had so many fights. But again, like through time, with, not to take credit for myself, but with really the transformation and with the
God at work in your life?
Yeah, exactly. And with the positive changes in my character and in my life, my dad was able to see that, and that has also transformed his heart. So I always say this: if you right now, my relationship with my dad is so good. He's
glad
one
to
of
hear
my
that.
fans. He's constantly watching my videos.
Really?
Yeah, praises them. He shares it with his friends. He tells them to watch as well. Because in the past for him, it was also difficult. The people outside would always also pressure him. He's like, look at what your son has become. Like, how are you accepting this? So he would also kind of, like, because of that social pressure as well, he will react more aggressively. But now that he sees me and now that we have this relationship, and he's like, he embraced it. Although he still thinks I'm lost, he still disagrees with my decision. He still hopes and prays probably for me to become Muslim again. But he sometimes comes, he's like, I miss you, I miss talking to you, let's talk. And we talk for hours. Sometimes he asks me questions about the Bible, about Paul, about what I've been working on. And on Sundays, for example, when he's not working, he watches like Christian content online as well. So he became that. So I always say, if you told me 10 years ago that my dad would be the person that he is today, I would have said absolutely no.
Wow.
But with my dad, what I've seen is that how God can transform like hearts and lives. And it doesn't have to be like just like, oh, he becomes a Christian too. No, like it has been like more than 10 years now and he's still not a Christian. But from that to that gives me hope that maybe in the next 10 years, because now if you ask me, I would say impossible. But in the next 10 years, maybe it will be like something like this. And so I'm praying for my whole family, and that although that was the most challenging part about my story, I think it turned out to be also the most rewarding now, fruits of my faith journey, I would say.
I love that. Well, I want to thank you, Nurullah, for being a part of the Apologetics Canada podcast. It's been great to have you with us. I do want to say, if anybody wants to get in touch with him, you can reach out to info@Apologetics Canada, and we could help get you connected. But where could people learn more about the work you're doing, or could see some of the videos you're doing? I know they're in Turkish, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that's the thing though. So I used to, because I started during the pandemic, I had the time to add subtitles, English subtitles into my videos. So some of them, especially the earlier ones, actually have English subtitles for those who are interested. And even the recent ones, when I find the time, I try to add English subtitles. But I do videos on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. So I'm active on like all social media platforms, and it's called Türkiye'de bir Hristiyan, and that would translate to a Christian in Turkey.
And we'll put those links and references in the description.
Yeah, we will. And in fact, Wes, this morning we just got an email from a guy from Australia telling us that he's been following us for years and wanting to get more connected, and how can we help him with resources and stuff like that. And I just want to encourage you as you support us. You're helping us support so many others around the world. We have our resources being translated into things like Spanish, Russian, all sorts of stuff, which is very, very cool. We're humbled by it. We're so thankful to get to meet people abroad that are using our resources. And man, we just pray God's richest blessings over you and the work you're doing. And I think it would be a fitting way for us to close this podcast in prayer. So Wes, could you close us in prayer here?
Yeah, I'd love to. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the opportunity to be here where we are, thinking even of the location that we're in now, and that there have been centuries and millennia of followers who have gathered together in your name and worshipped who you are and how you can change the world. And so in light of that, we just want to pray for Nurullah. We want to pray for his ministry and the impact that he's having both on his family and in his country. And so would you just continue to bless him and allow him to be able to be impactful and spirit-led in that work. Lord, would you take what he's doing and multiply it for your glory and your kingdom. And we just thank you for him and the ways that you have equipped him here today. Amen.
Thank you.
Well, I look forward to having you on the podcast again. Thank you for listening to the AC Podcast. Has been a ministry of Apologetics Canada. We will come back with more things to think about. Until then, love God, love people. Bye for now.
It's the AC Podcast.